Hello everyone. We're looking at a few photos I lifted from other creators' videos. There are several links in the description below. I think if you have an air compressor that's over 10 years old, you ought to see them. I've been aware of the potential ticking bomb in my outbuilding for a few years now. It's been weighing on my mind more and more as I realize it's just a matter of time before my compressor tank bursts. But this one really relates to my own compressor. This is an old Sears Craftsman compressor that's very similar to mine. The video these pictures are from shows this thing going off right in the poster's grandfather's face. His arms and legs were severely injured and he spent months in the hospital as a result. And as we'll soon see, the inside of my compressor looks worse than this one did. It's way past time to pressure test my tank. My Craftsman air compressor is 36 years old, and I've given it almost no attention in all that time. I have to say it's been a great piece of equipment for all these years, but lately I've been concerned that it might be time to give it up, due to safety concerns. If you haven't seen the videos about exploding compressor tanks, do yourself a favor and watch the videos online. They might save you a lot of grief. I'd hate to lose this compressor because it really kicks butt. And try finding another portable compressor this size that performs like this one does. The tank's maximum pressure and temperature is rated at 150 psi at 350 degrees. The original receipt from Sears indicates I paid $350 for this in 1987. It's difficult to imagine with all the higher cost, less capable units out there now.
It's reading around 115 it shut off at, 115 pounds.
More like 110. The original factory setting was 125 psi.
And it's leaking out the drain valve on the bottom. Even after I tightened up that drain valve on the bottom with a pair of pliers, I can still hear air leaking out of it. So I think that's going to have to be replaced.
If not the whole compressor.
That's tough grease. Well, we'll find out.
It took a few minutes to figure out how this belt guard comes off.
Yep.
It was several minutes before I discovered the only well-hidden notch to slip a screwdriver into and start unsnapping the plastic catches around the entire guard.
So this front cover just snaps off of here. Snaps on, snaps off. This is the original belt on this. Still has good tension on it.
It's never been adjusted.
No real signs of wear, no fraying. Durkee Atwood. Well, Durkee Atwood makes a hell of a belt. So that's the tank. The people who made the tank, or probably who made the whole compressor, was Lebowitz. 23J87. So it could be June, July 87. That's my guess. Maybe January. So this tank is getting up there in years. It probably should have been tested 15 years ago. And I'll continue off camera with cleaning. Four bolts hold the compressor down. Wonder what this weighs. Oh, it's pretty light. Maybe I shouldn't be wasting all this dish soap and elbow grease on a compressor tank that might not be any good. I'm going to pressure test it. If it fails, it's going to fail catastrophically. So I'll be taking it to the dump. It's only 14 gauge 3 conductor. This is a 240 volt 15 amp motor. It runs on a 240 20 amp receptacle. Okay, now here's something that concerns me. That might be rust coming through from the inside. And if that's the case, the tank might be compromised. Right here, rust bubbles right on the bottom.
I was still blissfully clueless at this point.
I'm going to have to see if I can look inside there with an endoscope. That's a check valve. I'm using this very inexpensive endoscope I bought a long time ago. And you can see the image here that's on this old iPad. It works. It's not great. And it will record a video of what I'm looking at here. This is, of course, the outside of the tank. So let's have a look inside.
It was actually difficult to get a clear image with this scope, the way the camera wiggles around at the end of a wire. So when I caught a clear frame, I froze the video for a bit to get a clear look at it. Right away, it's clear there's a lot of rust in this tank. The whole inside of the tank is rusted.
Not sure exactly what I'm looking at, but I know everything I see is heavily rusted in there.
That's the drain valve.
Absolutely everything.
That's the plug on one end of the tank.
Go straight down. I can go straight down and see the drain plug. See the drain valve.
I got a much more stable video with my cell phone. There's the drain valve.
right there in the middle of the screen. You see it? That's the drain valve. That's the best I can do, but what we see here is rust and probably oily muck. And I'm guessing the only reason the rust isn't worse is because of the oil. I'll wipe that lens off.
More cell phone video.
At any rate, whatever surface I'm looking at, top, bottom, or sides, or the end of the tank there, which I think that is, it's heavily rusted in there. Based on what I'm seeing here, I'm thinking that this tank is not safe. However, I'm going to pressure test it and verify. Okay, so the pressure test will be the maximum pressure of the tank, which is 150 psi according to the certification plate, plus 50%. So 150 plus 75 is 225. So I'm going to put 225 pounds of pressure in here and see if the tank bursts. It's the only way I'll know if it's safe to use. Then with the amount of rust that's in here, I don't know how long I can trust it. So I might have to re-pressure test it like every 3 years just to make sure. After I get it all set up, I won't have to totally disconnect and disassemble everything like I did this time. I'll be able to just screw my fittings in here, put a plug here, plug on the bottom, and run the pressure test. It'll be a lot quicker. I'll leave the compressor and the motor on top. But probably every 3 to 5 years I need to test this again if it passes the first pressure test, which is, it might be doubtful. But 220 psi on a 150 pound max pressure tank. So let's see how that works out.
So how does this hydraulic pressure testing work? The idea is to challenge the tank by pressurizing it a substantial amount more than it would normally be expected to withstand. If the tank doesn't burst at a much higher pressure than it's rated for, it's expected to be safe at its normal operating pressure. I'm going to pressurize this tank to a pressure of 150% of its maximum rated pressure. The maximum pressure of this tank is 150 psi, so I'm going to pressurize it to 225 psi. I put a blue tape marker on the gauge glass to indicate the desired pressure. I'll be using water pressure to test the tank rather than air. This is because compressed air has a lot of potential energy. If that energy is released all at once, as in a tank bursting, the result is what we saw in the pictures at the beginning of this video. It's a violent explosion. Take a look at this demonstration.
Here's a sewing needle.
Water doesn't compress like air does, so if the tank bursts under pressure, it doesn't have all that stored up energy to release. It doesn't explode.
And here's a balloon filled with water.
By testing with water pressure, we avoid a dangerous explosion.
I'm testing this setup on air pressure just to see if I have any leaks. And I'm up to, supposed to be 50 pounds. It's almost 50. I don't hear anything leaking.
The initial testing is really just to prove my test setup isn't leaking.
Okay, it's been about 20 minutes. And it seems like this tank is holding the pressure. And another big question mark for me was this valve. And this drain valve, which will be on the bottom of the tank.
That turned out to be wrong.
Right now that drain valve, the drain hole is plugged, just with a regular brass pipe plug. This valve, this ball valve, is original to the compressor. It says Lebowitz right on it. That came with the compressor when I bought it new, so I'm questioning if it will be good enough to hold the 225 psi test pressure I'm preparing to put on it. But right now I'm going to take it up to 100 and we'll see how it does. Notice I don't have that thing sitting next to the house or the barn. Slowly adding pressure. It's at 60 now. I'm going to bring it up to 100. Okay, my pressure source says it's at 100. There's another compressor. And that's at 100 right now. And this is at 100. We're just a skosh over. I'm going to close that. Okay, so it's only been about 5 minutes, but I discovered that the drain petcock here is losing some air.
The sound was so faint the cell phone mic didn't pick it up. It's a very minor leak that won't affect the hydro testing.
Okay, we'll just hang out and wait. We'll see if this pressure drops appreciably or noticeably in the 20-minute time. Okay, it's been the full 20 minutes. And I mean, it looks like the needle has barely moved. So it's not really losing much pressure. So now I'm going to take it up to the final test pressure of 125. This is the highest I'm going with air. 125 psi was the cutout pressure for the compressor when it was new. The maximum pressure is 150. I'm not going higher than 125 with air. Oh darn, the sun came back out. But that says 125 on this hose up at the regulator. This says about almost 130. That's the highest this tank has ever been since I've had it. So it went a little higher than I intended. It's in the shade until the sun comes around and it isn't anymore. Hopefully it'll be in the shade for the next 20. It's only been a few minutes. It's sitting right at 125. I'll have to see how long it takes to drop from there. It's been 20 minutes since it was at 125. So I think everything's holding. And I'm probably ready to move on to the next phase, which is to fill the tank totally with water as much as possible. I have to have it level so that the rounded top of the cylinder is able to let air escape through the fittings in the top there as I fill it with water. Okay, there's a water hose hooked up to it, and I'm going to start filling it. And the air is going to have to leave through this valve. But I just wanted to play a little bit, so I closed this. We're going to see how much pressure my hose will put on the tank. 25. Yeah, that's about it. 55 psi. Make sure all the air is up on this end. That's 20 gallons times 8.345 pounds. I guess all the air's out of the tank. Well, there's a little more. That's it. There's no more air in there. I chipped this end up pretty good, and I got a few last gasps of air. Okay, I replaced that water valve that was here with a plug. And when I was testing with air, that's where I had that drain cock. But that, I think, was leaking. I put a plug there now. And then I replaced the air chuck fitting with the pressure washer chuck fitting. The biggest questions I have are, will this valve hold back 225 psi of water? Will this aluminum block here hold 225 psi? And then of course there's the really big question, will this old tank withstand 225 psi at its current age of 36, and with all that rust we saw inside it before? This is going to determine whether or not I keep this tank or not, because if the tank blows, obviously then it's trash. If it holds the 225, then I guess I'll be able to use it a little longer. I'll probably have to start pressure testing once every 1 to 2 years, I'm guessing. What do you think? How often should I pressure test it if it passes?
I have to admit, I was a little nervous about overpressurizing this tank, even with water. So I set it up far away from the house and wore some safety gear. I used my Generac pressure washer to pressurize the tank. It's time to start it up. With the benefit of hindsight, I learned something right here. I should have partially closed the ball valve on the tank to slow the flow of pressurized water. This rapid, unimpeded pressurization caused a lot of additional shock to the tank. It's so difficult to control the pressure wand, which is basically on or off. I overshot the mark by 20 psi. Again, it would have been best if I had throttled the water flow using the ball valve. The tank didn't burst. It passed the real test with flying colors. I was anxious to bleed the extra 20 psi off the tank. It didn't take much.
That's about 220. I let out a little too much, but that's still a good test. Because I did go significantly over 225. So now I'm just going to wait half an hour maybe and see if it drops.
With the tank sitting in the hot sun, the pressure was building up at a fairly constant rate. With the video sped up 10 times, you can easily see the needle heading higher.
Still holding above 220. That's pretty impressive. I guess I can put the pressure washer away. And that valve, that pneumatic valve that came with the Lebowitz compressor, is holding 225. It held over 225. Wow, the pressure is rising. Probably because this thing's out in the hot sun. The blue tape mark there is 225. I'm going to bleed off just a little bit of pressure. I really don't want it to be over 225. Right on the nose, 225. Still climbing above 225 in this heat. Of course, I'm doing this on the hottest day we've had, 93 degrees. Oh, now it's a little below 225. It'll probably build some more pressure though. How's it doing? It's back up to 225. Trying to go over that. Well, we'll see what happens. I'll be back in another minute and see. Oh boy, it built up more pressure. It's up to 132 maybe. I'm going to have to bleed a little off. I'll go a little more. Seems to go up about 1 pound a minute, so I'll be back in 5 minutes. That's 220 right there. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I bet it's up to 225 again. Okay, it's holding 225. It's been over half an hour. Time to give that tank a break. Okay, now I've got to drain it. I wanted to catch it in a pan because it's got oil in it. I didn't want to just spray all that oil all over the yard here.
That's all the water that has to be added to my full 20-gallon tank to increase the pressure from 0 to 225 psi.
So this concludes our test. It passed with flying colors. It doesn't look as bad as I thought it would. I was expecting a lot more oil. Here's a little. It's not too bad.
I wanted to remove the end plugs on the tank to get a better look inside and provide access for whatever rust preventative I was going to add. So I strapped it down to a hefty pallet and used a scissor jack to hold the pallet down under the weight of the truck. I jumped on a 3/4 inch breaker bar with a 3-foot pipe on the handle. Even though I was applying over 600 foot-pounds of torque, I wasn't able to budge the plugs. I didn't want to apply heat to the tank, so I abandoned this effort. The derusting process was started months after the pressure testing. I put 2 gallons of evaporust into the tank and plugged it up. The tank was rolled into sequential positions and leveled to allow each section to be soaked for 48 hours. I used a heater on it after the fall temperatures dropped. After saving the used evaporust and rinsing the tank out, I dried it for 2 days. I could feel hot air blowing out the drain port.
be looking down in now toward the bottom.
I got what I hoped would be a better endoscope to look inside the tank. It honestly wasn't much better. The inside of a totally enclosed tank like this is total darkness, and the LEDs on those little scopes can't provide enough light to get a good look. I tried to introduce some illumination inside the tank by pulling a string of Christmas lights through the top and bottom ports. It wasn't enough light to fill the void. I'm not very impressed by the results of soaking the tank with evaporust, seen here. At this point, I had to take it or leave it.
So I emptied this entire can of WD-40 Specialist corrosion inhibitor. It's supposed to protect the metal for a year.
I sprayed it into the top ports with the bottom port plugged, then plugged the two top ports.
I won't have any way of knowing if it does or not, but it's better than nothing. And as we know, WD-40 stands for water displacement, 40th recipe or something like that. So just doing the best I can do with it.
I did my best to distribute the WD-40 throughout the inside of the tank.
The original drain plug on this would drain straight out the bottom. I'm replacing that with a 90-degree L here because I want it to drain out the side. So it's going to drain out the bottom and then go out this way, and I'll have a valve out here somewhere that I can easily reach without having to reach under. This is the check valve. It prevents air from pushing back out through the compressor when it's not running. This motor bracket pivots on this pin. And it's also how the belt tension is adjusted. And the only thing that holds that pin in or keeps it from backing out is the foot on the compressor here, which blocks its path. This is the original belt. That got it. That pin goes all the way through. There's a hole here and a hole in the other side of this mounting top plate. Pin goes through there, goes through holes in the handle, and then locks in like that. That looks pretty clean. It's got some stuff in it, but it is surprisingly clean. This oil doesn't really have that many hours on it. I'm changing it because I'm trying to clean out that crankcase in there. Tip it up a bit. Put the wheel on the other side on top of a 2x4. So it's 1.5 inches off the ground. According to this gauge, it stopped at 120. So I installed this to the drain hole on the bottom. It's a 1/4 inch pipe out to a 1/4 inch valve. And that's just a 90-degree turn so that the drain air will blow out the bottom. it kicks back on at 80 psi. I'd rather have the cut in at 95, cut out at 125. There's really no adjustment for that. I checked out this valve, and there was actually pieces or parts of it loose in there, floating around loose. So this isn't working properly. So I ordered a new one, and I guess I'll make a video out of replacing that.
Thank you for watching. Please take a moment to like and subscribe.